On November 18th, 2012, 13-year-old Dylan Redwine was flying out to Colorado to spend Thanksgiving with his dad. His parents had separated the year before, and he didn't really have a good relationship with his dad, so he was dreading this trip. He finally arrived to his father's cabin in Bayfield, Colorado on November 18th, 2012, sending a text to his mother saying, quote, "I'm on the plane to Durango," with his mom saying, quote, "Oh good, you did so well, son. Proud of you. I love you, and thanks for keeping in touch so well. You're a flying pro." But unfortunately, after these exchange of messages, it would be the last time anyone has ever heard from Dylan. Hello, my name is Hailey Elizabeth, and if you don't know who I am, I post videos pertaining to a little bit of whatever I want: conspiracy theories, controversial people, true crime, vlogs. So if you're interested in any of that, you can subscribe, and if not, completely okay. For today's case, we're going to be talking about the case of Dylan Redwine. Now, there is a lot to get through, so we're just going to hop right into it. Dylan Redwine was born on February 6, 1999 to his mother Elaine, his father Mark, and his two older brothers Corey and Brandon. Brandon being his half-sibling from Mark's previous marriage. 13-year-old Dylan was described as a typical 13-year-old kid. He played baseball and he actually played in the Little League. He loved playing video games and riding around on his bike and hanging out with his friends and going to the park. For the most part, he was just a very typical average kid. He didn't really get into trouble or hang around with the bad crowds. Dylan's father Mark was actually a truck driver, and because of his job, he wasn't really home very often, and that really took a toll on not just his marriage, but Dylan's relationship with his father. And then in 2012, after 18 years of marriage, Elaine decides to get a divorce, and this was a very rough and messy divorce. They had to basically split everything that they had. They also had to go through custody battles, and in the end, the mother Elaine ended up getting full custody of the children, but Mark did have visitation rights. And Dylan was personally very happy with this arrangement because in the beginning of the divorce, Dylan and his father's relationship became extremely strained. Mark was very frustrated and stressed about the divorce, and he unfortunately took out his frustration on his kids. And it wasn't just Dylan that hated his father. Corey and Brandon also hated Mark. Brandon, a couple years prior to this, Brandon actually moved out of the house at the age of 18, and he moved out of state to get married and have kids. Mark ended up moving out of the house and he moved to Bayfield, Colorado, which was about 6 hours outside of where Elaine and the kids were. And although Mark was upset that he didn't get to see his kids as often, in the year of 2012, Mark had called Elaine and asked if Dylan could come out to his cabin and spend Thanksgiving with him. And although Dylan did not like his dad, it was court-ordered visitation, so he was kind of forced to go. So then on November 18th, 2012, Elaine had drove Dylan to the airport, and Dylan was actually taking this trip all by himself because, as I said, Brandon had already moved out of the house, and at the time, Corey was over the age of 18, so since he was an adult, he didn't really have to go. Dylan was dreading the entire trip because on top of that, Mark also lived in an isolated cabin in the middle of the woods. He was literally surrounded by wooded area, so there wasn't much to do. And then at 6 p.m., that's when Dylan sent a text to his mom saying that he arrived in Durango. And then a little while after that, Elaine texted Dylan again saying, quote, "Your dad gets you, son?" And he replies with, quote, "Yes," and a sad face. And she responds with, quote, "Miss you already, but try to have fun." Mark picked up Dylan from the airport that day, and then after the airport, they went to Walmart to get a couple groceries, and on the way home from Walmart, they were going to stop at a restaurant to eat dinner, but Dylan actually wanted McDonald's, so they went through a drive-thru and then just took the food home. And on his first night there, he had actually asked his dad if he could go and spend the night at a friend's house because he did have friends in the area, and apparently all of his friends were spending the night at this one guy's house, and so he wanted to join in on the sleepover. And of course, he did not want to be with his father this weekend, but Mark said no. And so since Dylan was so desperate to get out of this house, he actually made plans with his friends the next day at 6:30 a.m. And on November 19th, 2012, and before I explain the day, I do want to mention that this day is all according to Mark. keep that in mind. Mark says that he woke up this day at 7 a.m. and when he walked out into the living room, he saw Dylan still sleeping on the couch, and he knew that Dylan was gonna go out with his friends at 6:30. So Mark goes over, he tries to wake him up, but Dylan says that he's too tired and he doesn't want to wake up, and so Mark just says, okay, I'll leave you there then, and he goes out to run some errands. He gets back to the house around 11:30 a.m., but when he gets inside, the door is open. He walks in to see Nickelodeon playing on the TV and an empty bowl of cereal sitting on the coffee table, but when he searches through the home, Dylan is nowhere to be found. He does notice that Dylan's backpack, cell phone, and fishing pole were all gone, so he just kind of assumed that maybe Dylan did go hang out with his friends. So Mark decided to take a nap and woke up around 1:30, but realized Dylan had never came home, so he tries calling him and texting him, but there was no response. From 2:30 to 3 o'clock, Mark went over to Dylan's friends' house to see if maybe Dylan was there, but none of Dylan's friends had seen Dylan or talked to him all day. There was actually 2 specific friends that were trying to contact Dylan all this day and had gotten no responses. One of the messages saying, quote, come to Nando's, which at 6:30 a.m. that's where Dylan was supposed to be, but then when he never showed up, that's when he sent another text saying, quote, dude, your dad's looking for you. And then a little while after that, he says, quote, are you all right, dude? Dude, you need to call somebody ASAP. We're all worried about you. Your mom called and she's worried, bro. Seriously, when you get this message, call someone. And so at this point, Mark is extremely nervous, and so he goes over to the police station to file a missing persons report, and while he's there, he texts Elaine to ask her if she's seen him. He texts her saying, quote, Elaine, I was wondering if you heard from Dylan. I've been trying to reach him all afternoon. She replies with, it's really worrying when I'm 7 hours away and get a message like this from you. I haven't heard from Dylan today. Where did you leave him or last see him? Mark says, I went to town for errands and he was fine. I'm just concerned and thought you may have heard from him. Elaine says, was he at the Valecito house? I'm concerned as well. Please let me know when you find him. Mark says, yes, at the lake, and I will. Elaine says, it's weird he would just up and leave. Does he have his phone? Mark replies with, I agree, which is why I'm asking you if you've heard from him. I assume he does and why I've sent him text and called. What I don't know is if he has a charger or if it's charged. Elaine says, quote, I am terribly freaked out, but he's roaming around in the dark. I think we should call the police. Mark replies with, I don't want to freak you out as I'm sure he's fine, but don't think I'm not concerned. I've just left the Bayfield Marshal's office and headed back to the house. Elaine says, quote, did you get into a fight with him or something? How long has he been missing? Mark replies with, no, we talked and everything is fine. He's been gone several hours. Elaine replies with, well, it's not fine. He's missing. Have you heard anything from Dylan? You said you called the Marshal's office. They said they have no record of you calling them. I called them. Mark replies with, quote, no, and I am extremely concerned at this point. I just left Tristan's house and he has not seen him. Waiting for the sheriff to call back. I'm doing all that I can and will let you know the moment I hear from him. Elaine says, quote, he wouldn't just leave. He would have called me. I am so suspect of you right now. How could he just disappear? Mark says, it's just like you to blame me. Right now, the best thing for him is finding him. I just spoke with the deputy. His fishing pole is missing and the deputy is on his way up. He asked that I search the property, which I will do now. I know this is difficult, but we gotta believe he is okay. Elaine says, when was the last time you talked to him? Mark replies with, this morning. Elaine says, are you looking for him? What are you doing to find him? You seem so nonchalant that our kid is missing. Talk to him on his cell this morning or when you left the house? Did you talk to him at all today on his cell phone? And then after those text messages were sent off, Mark just completely ignored Elaine. And of course, after this very concerning exchange of messages and Mark won't answer her, that is when Elaine and Corey immediately get into the car and drive down to Durango in search for Dylan. They arrived late that night and went straight to the police station, and they actually went to Mark's house between 1 and 2 a.m. and searched around Mark's property in order to find Dylan. And during the search, Mark was actually not outside. He was inside of his house sleeping. So while his family and the police are out here trying to find his kid, he's inside with the lights off, sleeping as if nothing's going on. So the police unfortunately end up not finding anything, and now they have to try to piece together what they think happened. And so what they know for sure is that Dylan did go to the airport because there is security footage of that. There's also security footage of Mark and Dylan leaving the airport and arriving at Walmart getting groceries. So we do know that they did go to Walmart, and we do know that they did go to McDonald's, but after that, they don't really know what happened next. Police are looking more into Mark, and they are able to confirm that from from 8:30 to 11:30 on November 19th, Mark truly was out running errands. He went to his work's payroll office, he went to his divorce attorney's office, and he sent off a child support check to Elaine. And Mark says that he thinks that either Dylan wandered off to a lake nearby the house, or he could have walked to a friend's house of his, but this house that Mark was referring to was 9.5 miles away. I do not know a single 13-year-old in 2012 that would walk 9.5 miles to a friend's house in the freezing cold of Colorado. Mark lived near the San Juan mountains and forest, so there was going to be a lot of ground to cover. So they got together a huge search. They brought out canine dogs, helicopters, drones, volunteers. They searched for hours, and one of the dogs actually picked up a scent in front of Mark's house, but for some reason none of them had anything to match Dylan's scent, so we don't really know if this scent was Dylan's or not, but other than that, they didn't really find anything else. Days went by searching and there was still no sign. Thanksgiving went by and there was still no sign. And so Elaine decided to create her own search team. And so Elaine and the family started doing press conferences, they made missing persons posters, they had fundraisers, rallies, they even made a Facebook page with a $50,500 reward to anyone with any information. And Elaine this entire time was extremely suspicious of Mark, because I don't remember if you caught what I was saying in the text messages earlier. After Elaine basically called Mark out and said, actually you didn't call the sheriff's office because I just called the sheriff's office and they have no record of you ever calling them or showing up there. You notice how after that Mark just didn't acknowledge it. He just completely ignored what she was saying, and that is something that Mark does frequently throughout this. He just tends to ignore all evidence or anyone trying to call him out for any wrong he's doing. And another detail was that Mark said that when he walked into the house, he looked at the TV and it was Nickelodeon playing, but Elaine goes on to say that Dylan hasn't watched Nickelodeon in around a year. At this time he was 13, so he was more into MTV, and Elaine said that it's really disappointing that Mark didn't even know his own son enough to make up a good enough lie. Weekend after Thanksgiving, during another search, the canine dogs actually picked up a scent near the Vallecito Lake, so they brought boats and divers, but unfortunately, once again, nothing was found. On day 9 of the search, the police knew that this wasn't just a runaway situation. They were definitely looking for a body now. And Dylan's half-brother Brandon, as I said, at this point, he was in a different state. He was married with kids, and so when Brandon heard this news, he immediately flew down to Colorado to help aid in the search. And that's when Elaine got on TV and she just basically publicly said that she is very suspicious of her ex-husband Mark. She says that it's really odd to her and really disappointing to her that throughout this entire thing, Mark has been little to no help. He hasn't helped out with any of the fundraisers, any of the Facebook pages, or even the searches. He's ignoring the police at all costs, and she just finds it extremely frustrating that she's out here every single day, fighting every day to find her son, while Mark just sits around and doesn't do anything. But Mark's response to this was that people just needed something to talk about and that he was innocent and he didn't know what happened. The police actually later got a search warrant to search Mark's house, and when they did, they ended up finding a few drops of Dylan's blood in the house, but Mark actually gave the explanation that that blood was from a year ago when Dylan was staying with him. He accidentally cut his finger, and the police also took a chunk of the area rug from the living room that had an odd stain on it. Mark after this was brought into questioning, and the police, when they sat Mark down, straight up told him, we are not suspecting you, don't worry, we know that this is scary and traumatizing. This is simply just protocol, and all we're doing is asking questions, because in the beginning the police didn't really suspect Mark too much. They were just seeing him still as the victim's father. But when Mark was brought into questioning, he completely blew up when the police were trying to ask him questions. He said things like, "You guys are blaming me, I have nothing to do with this, I have no clue what happened. You guys are pointing me to be a suspect even though I am a victim because I lost my son." So after this huge blowout, the police were looking at him very suspiciously, so they decided to give everyone polygraph tests, and while Elaine passed with flying colors, Mark ended up failing terribly. And in February of 2019, another search was conducted around Mark's house, but unfortunately nothing was found. And after this, the family actually actually went on the Dr. Phil show. The entire episode is around 2 hours long, and I'll leave it linked down below if you guys want to watch it. But the whole entire thing basically is just Elaine and Mark arguing back and forth. Mark says that he's innocent and he doesn't have anything to do with it, while Elaine literally points out evidence and like gives things to him in why she thinks he has something to do with it. They actually end up bringing on Corey, and Corey goes on to say that he hates his father. He doesn't even call his dad dad, he calls him Mark, and he didn't just hate his father, Brandon hated his dad, and Dylan also hated his dad. He said that Mark was physically, verbally, and mentally abusive, and Dr. Phil actually asked Mark, why don't you help out with the fundraisers or the search efforts? And Mark completely ignores this question, and he goes on to say that he's innocent and he doesn't know what anyone is talking about, and he's tired of people blaming him. And so Dr. Phil says to Mark, okay, well, if you're so innocent, let's do a polygraph test right here, right now, in front of a live studio audience. And at first Mark is down, he's like, bring him out. But the polygraph examiner comes out, and apparently it's a highly trained polygraph examiner who has several years of experience in the field and has busted dozens of criminals. And now all of a sudden Mark doesn't want to do it. He thinks it's stupid, it's a waste of time. He says that even if he did try to tell the truth, they would say that he was lying for views. And this actually leads to a pretty big screaming argument between Dr. Phil and Mark that basically just ends with Mark walking off stage and the audience booing him on the way out. And even the polygraph examiner after the fact said that throughout all their years of experience, they have never met a parent who is in desperate search of their missing child refuse a polygraph test. Hi everyone, don't worry, it's still me thanking the sponsor of today's episode, Factor. With the holiday season coming up, it is about to be the busiest time of the year. You're buying Christmas presents for people, you're traveling, you're hanging up your Christmas decorations, you're buying Christmas decorations, you have Thanksgiving, you have Black Friday. Sometimes, personally, I get a little too busy where some days it'll be like 4 p.m. and I'm like, why am I feeling so groggy and tired right now? And then I remember the only thing that I've had today was a venti Starbucks coffee at 9 a.m. and a couple of Pringles. And so with this bustling holiday season, you might be looking for nutritious, flavorful meals to fuel your jam-packed days. And thanks to Factor, who is America's #1 ready-to-eat meal delivery service, they can help you eat well for breakfast, lunch, and dinner with chef-prepared, dietitian-approved, ready-to-eat meals delivered straight to your door. You'll save time and stay on track with your healthy lifestyle while tackling all of your holiday to-dos. You can skip the meal planning, grocery shopping, chopping, prepping, and cleaning up and get Factor's fresh, never frozen meals delivered straight to your door. They're ready in just 2 minutes, so all you have to do is heat and enjoy. Choose from the 35 plus chef-crafted meals every week that support a healthy lifestyle and meet your meal preference, whether it's calorie smart, vegan, veggie, protein plus, or more wholesome options. And Factor isn't just for dinner. Count on extra convenience any time of the day with their assortment of 55 plus add-ons to suit various preferences and tastes. This December, get Factor and enjoy eating well without the hassle. Simply choose your meals and enjoy fresh, flavor-packed meals delivered to your door, ready in just 2 minutes, no prep, no mess. Head over to factormeals.com/behind50 and use code behind50 to get 50% off. That's code behind50 at factormeals.com/behind50 to get 50% off. Thank you to Factor for sponsoring today's video. Now back to your video. And then on June 25th of 2013, a 5-day search was conducted going over a 10-mile length leading up to the street where Mark lived in search for Dylan or any sign of Dylan. In these woods, they actually would find signs of Dylan. They ended up finding scraps of a White Sox t-shirt that was confirmed to be Dylan's. They found Dylan's earbuds, as well as his sock, his shoe, and a 4-inch strand of hair confirmed to be Dylan's hair. And so because of all of this new evidence that they found, they decided to extend the search for another 5 days. And on June 27th, 2 days later, police would unfortunately inform the family that during their search, they found a black garbage bag, and inside were human bones, all confirmed to be 13-year-old Dylan Redwine. The partial remains were found about 8 miles away from Mark's home, and the following weekend they held a candle vigil and a balloon release to which Mark didn't attend either of them. And And when medical examiners were examining these bones, they couldn't really figure out too much information based upon this. They couldn't really figure out what the cause of death was and if this was either a wildlife attack or a human attack. And then in spring of 2014, at around 2 a.m., Mark would call a reporter to tell that reporter that he is about to check himself into a mental hospital because he feels like he's going crazy after all of these stalkers and haters and reporters. He says that Elaine that day had drove past his house and screamed murderer out the window. Now, the reporter is very confused at the fact of why Mark would call him instead of like another friend or a family member. But shortly after this, Elaine ended up getting granted a restraining order against Mark because at this point she feared for not just her safety but the safety of her two other sons, Corey and Brandon. And as I said, Brandon had kids of his own too. And Elaine would also go on to say that throughout their 18 years of marriage, there had been a couple times where Mark had been violent. And then in August of 2015, nearly a year later, Mark was finally identified as a person of interest, while Elaine's boyfriend, and Corey were all cleared. Mark was the only one that had major inconsistencies with his story and also had really odd behavior following the case. And on November 1st, 2015, that is when more remains would be found, when a biker was going down a trail on Mountain Valley Road and came across a human skull. This skull was later identified to be the skull of Dylan Redwine. Examiners did an autopsy on the skull and found a fracture right above the left eyebrow and blunt force trauma to the back of the head. Now, Mark's old story, his old theory, he said that he believes Dylan had wandered off into the woods and gotten eaten by an animal. The medical examiners had confirmed that this was not blunt force trauma from an animal. This was definitely done by a human. So now Mark's new story was that he now believes that Dylan had gotten kidnapped and then murdered. And the interrogators are super confused because that makes no sense. They literally tell him that is 100% not true. Nothing in our studies suggests a kidnapping. So then Mark comes up with a new story and he now says that he believes Dylan wandered off into the woods and got shot by a hunter. And Mark believed this theory so much that he made a video of him going out into the woods where his son's skull was found and demonstrating how Dylan could have been shot by a hunter, and furthermore posted this onto Facebook. Everyone was shocked, obviously, because it seemed like Mark was the only one that was trying all these different theories. Like, everyone knows from the skull and the evidence that it was blunt force trauma done by a human, and if it were a gunshot, they would find a gunshot wound. It seemed like everyone else knew exactly what happened, and Mark was the only one that was acting clueless and making up theories. Once again, as I said earlier, Mark ignoring everything that makes him look guilty. So then Elaine, after 2 years, she is fed up and she is frustrated, and so she decides to start a rally right outside of Mark's house to get Mark to come out of the house and just come forward to the police and bring justice for Dylan. And I completely understand why Elaine would do this. I mean, if you're a mother and you lose your son, like your son is just ripped away from you, and you know that your ex-husband is responsible for this, and every day you are waking up without your son and you're going out there, you're doing fundraisers every day, you're speaking at press conferences, your whole entire life becomes searching for your son, while the man with all of the answers just sits around and says nothing. Like, that's frustrating. So I completely understand why she would do this, but there were a lot of people that thought that like it was too overboard. And then in the summer of 2017, after 5 long years of fighting, that is when the police finally have enough evidence to officially arrest Mark. Mark at the time was actually living in Washington, D.C. because he had moved out of Colorado when all of those rallies were starting in front of his house, and he was arrested at his trucking job out in Washington, D.C. He was booked into the county jail at 1 p.m. and he was being charged with the second-degree murder of Dylan Redwine, as well as child abuse resulting in death. He was later flown to Colorado to await trial. And then on August 15th of 2017, Mark had pled not guilty to all charges, and Elaine wasn't even surprised that he pled not guilty because it's become a pattern that that Mark never takes responsibility for any wrong that he has done despite the evidence presented. Now, the trial actually didn't start until 2021 because this trial was rescheduled 10 times. The first set of reschedulings actually came from Mark's lawyer. He was arrested for domestic violence, and so Mark had to scramble and get a new lawyer. But around the time that he got this new lawyer in 2019, the next year was 2020, and it was COVID, and so a lot of trials during this time were being postponed. His lawyer also got COVID, and so that further delayed the case. But in 2021, his trial finally started, and this is where all of the truly dark and disturbing details of everything would fully come out. The prosecutors believe that Mark had killed Dylan on the living room floor by hitting him in the back of the head, leading Dylan to fall onto the ground, which would explain his fractured eyebrow. But they also believe that Mark had dismembered his son's body and put the remains in the back of his truck and took those human remains and spread them all throughout the forest. And that's because the canine units had picked up scent of human remains in the back of Mark's truck and on Mark's clothing, as well as in the living room. The police would also go in with black light and they would find blood all over the living room. They would find blood on the floor, the couch, the coffee table, and underneath an area rug. And so it was pretty clear at this point that Mark had done this, but why? What was the motive? And that's when Corey went up to make his testimony. Corey had revealed that the year before Dylan went missing, him, Dylan, and their father Mark were on a road trip. And Dylan and Corey were in the back seat watching videos and movies on Mark's laptop. And when they went to go take pictures on the laptop, they went through the photo gallery and came across really disturbing photos of their father. And so they immediately put it away and they waited until they got home. And when they did, they went straight to the bathroom, locked the door, and they took photos of these photos on their phone. These photos revealed Mark wearing bright red lipstick, bright red blush, as well as eyeshadow. He was wearing a red bra and a blue lace top, and he was also wearing an adult diaper full of human feces. While he was wearing this diaper, the next few photos would actually display Mark eating and licking the feces from the diaper, as well as hanging the diaper from his mouth. And so obviously after the two boys saw this, they were left shocked, they were left traumatized, but they also knew they couldn't tell anyone about this. And Dylan was 12 years old at the time, and so seeing something like this is extremely traumatizing. And Dylan even brought it up to Corey a couple of times throughout the year, and it's suspected that Dylan had even confronted his dad about it when he went to visit for Thanksgiving on November 18th, 2012. I mean, again, he was only 13, so he was just scared and curious and didn't know what it meant. He probably also couldn't get it out of his head, and his dad is the only one he could tell this to. But Mark completely flipped out. He was screaming at Dylan, he was furious, and it was said that it was this violent rage that led Mark to kill Dylan. Corey said that Mark did deal with a lot of mental issues, but he knows for a fact that Mark did know what he was doing at the time of the crime. Now, what did Mark and his defense team have to say about all this? Mark basically just said that wasn't him. He said that man in the pictures, even though you can literally see his face, he goes on to say that it was actually Elaine that photoshopped his face on those photos just to embarrass him. And as far as the bones found near his house, he says that it was the actual murderer and the actual kidnapper that placed those bones near Mark's house to make him look even more suspicious. Elaine went up to testify and she agreed with Corey, and she said that she believed Mark had killed Dylan. Mark's ex-wife, her name was Betsy, actually came up to testify, and she said that she was married to Mark for 6 years and they had Brandon together. Their entire marriage was just like Elaine and Mark's. It was a lot of fighting, a lot of screaming, a lot of abuse. And during her and Mark's divorce, she remembers specifically Mark one time threatening to kill Brandon so that she could never see her kids again. This obviously made her very very scared and it never left her, but then when she saw everything happening with Dylan, she got a really deep pit in her stomach. She also says that about 30 years ago, because she had known Mark for a very long time, they were going on a camping trip, and while they were camping, Mark kind of made a joke and was like, if I were to ever kill someone, I would just dump the body in the woods. And at the time, Betsy just sort of laughed it off because they were in a very deep wooded area where it was lots of vast valleys, and so she just kind of laughed it off at the time. Brandon even took to the stand to say that one night during one of the searches, they all had a meeting together, including Mark, and the meeting was basically just to discuss the schedule for the next day, what they were going to do, and Brandon confronted Mark at this meeting and basically said, why aren't you helping with the fundraisers? Why aren't you helping in the search? All you do is sit in the house all day and act like nothing's going on. Brandon also noted that throughout this entire thing, he never once saw Mark cry or get anxious or overwhelmed. He weirdly just looked bothered most of the time. Brandon says that he also remembers a couple of times where Mark had said that he believes Dylan died due to blunt force trauma to the head. And this was way before they found the skull. And that's why Brandon kind of took note of it, because blunt force trauma is a really specific way to go. So he just thought it was odd that Mark would say that. As far as Mark's defense team basically tried to throw away every piece of evidence that was available. They tried to say that the canine evidence was junk science. They also said that the photos of him dressing up have nothing to do with the case and they were purely just put up there to make him look bad. They said that no one even suspected Mark until Elaine started up rumors and turned everyone against him, and so because of that, her whole testimony should just be thrown out. They also said that the blunt force trauma could have been done by the tooth of a bear or a mountain lion, but that would simply make no sense because the bones are very clean, and typically if it was done by wildlife, you would see some sort of teeth marks. They also tried to say that the police have been biased and lazy since the very beginning, and actually when they were handling Dylan's skull during the examination process, one of the examiners had accidentally broke off a piece of the skull. They basically said that Dylan didn't want to spend the week with his father, and so he wandered off and got eaten by an animal. The jury took 6 hours to come to a verdict, and eventually they did find Mark guilty for the second-degree murder of Dylan Redwine, as well as child abuse resulting in death. He was sentenced to 48 years in prison, and I know a lot of people were going to say, why isn't it life in prison? I was thinking the same exact thing, but at the time, Mark was 56 years old, and he has a 48-year sentence, so I'm pretty sure he will die in prison. And when Mark was read his verdict, he basically just sat there emotionless and with a blank stare. There are surprisingly a lot of people to this day that believe Mark is innocent. They believe that they have the wrong guy, that Mark, the reason why he wasn't going to like fundraisers or anything like that was because if he went, he would just be harassed and mocked the whole time. But I do not believe that for a second. Like, if you are going for your son, you're going for your son. You're not going for everyone else. You're not going for like the people yelling at you. And there were also a lot of people that believe that the pictures had no significance to the case, but personally, I feel like that does have a lot of significance to the case. I feel like these pictures, I think we can all agree, are very disgusting pictures. It's not even something you should do behind closed doors. Like, this could actually make you sick, and obviously Mark did not want these pictures going out. And if Mark knew that Dylan had this information, he knew that Dylan was probably gonna go home and tell his mom or his friends or his other brothers. And I think it's kind of crazy that Mark did what he did because he didn't want these photos to get out, but then now the photos are actually out. But yeah, that is the end of today's video. If you guys found this case interesting, make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe. If you want to follow me on any of my socials, like my Instagram, that will be linked down below, as well as my PO box if you want to send me anything. But yeah, that is all from me. I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day today. Make sure to go outside today, get some fresh air, be safe out there. And as always, I love you, I love you, I love you, and I will see you guys next week.